In 1877, America was barely reunited after a devastating civil war, an isolated nation focused inward. By 1991, it stood alone as the world's only superpower. Between those years, 2 world wars, a Great Depression, an atomic bomb, a Cold War, that brought humanity to the brink of annihilation. This is the story of how America transformed from a regional power into a global colossus. From isolationism to world leadership. From neutrality to nuclear supremacy. From staying out of foreign wars to reshaping the entire planet. In just 114 years, everything changed. This is how America became a superpower. November 9th, 1989. Berlin, Germany. Thousands of people swarmed the Berlin Wall with hammers and pickaxes, tearing down the concrete barrier that has divided their city for 28 years. East Germans pour through checkpoints into West Berlin. Strangers embrace. Champagne flows. People dance on top of the wall. The Cold War, the 45-year standoff between American-led democracy and Soviet-led communism that threatened nuclear apocalypse, is ending. The Soviet Union is collapsing. America stands alone as the world's superpower. But rewind 112 years to 1877. America is a very different country, still healing from civil war, largely isolated from world affairs, barely a factor in global politics. Most Americans want nothing to do with Europe's problems. How does a nation transform so completely in just over a century? The answer lies in 2 world wars that America didn't start but helped finish, an economic depression that reshaped the P, government's role, and a Cold War that consumed nearly half a century. This is the story of America's rise to superpower. From 1877 to 1991, the years that made America the most powerful nation in human history, got 1877 to 1900. The Gilded Age, a term coined by Mark Twain to describe an era that glitters on the surface but hides corruption and inequality underneath. America is transforming at breathtaking speed. Railroads connect the continent. Telegraph and telephone revolutionize communication. Edison invented the light bulb. Steel production explodes under Andrew Carnegie. John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil controls 90% of America's oil refining. J.P. Morgan dominates banking. These men become fabulously wealthy, the richest individuals in human history relative to the economy. Carnegie's wealth today would equal over $300 billion. But workers toil in dangerous conditions for poverty wages. Children work in factories and mines. There are no safety regulations, no minimum wage, no unions with real power. Labor unrest explodes. The Great Railroad Strike of 1877 sees federal troops deployed against strikers. The Haymarket Affair of 1886 ended in bombing and executions. The Pullman Strike of 1894 cripples rail traffic nationwide. Each time, government sides with owners against workers. Millions of immigrants arrived, 25 million between 1880 and 1924 from Southern and Eastern Europe, seeking opportunity but finding poverty and prejudice. They crowd into urban tenements, providing cheap labor for America's industrial boom. By the 1890s, America is an industrial giant, the world's largest economy. But it's still not a major international player. That's about to change. In 1898, the USS Maine explodes in Havana Harbor. The cause is unclear, probably an accident, but newspapers scream, "Remember the Maine," and demand war with Spain. You furnish the pictures. Newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst allegedly tells an artist, "And I'll furnish the war." The Spanish-American War lasts just 4 months. American forces defeat Spain in Cuba and the Philippines. It's a lopsided victory that gives America an overseas empire, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. The Philippines particularly troubles many Americans. Filipinos had been fighting for independence from Spain. They don't want American rule. Either. A brutal insurgency lasts years, killing thousands. America has become a colonial power, contradicting its founding principles. Theodore Roosevelt, who leads the Rough Riders cavalry unit in Cuba and becomes president in 1901, embraces American power. Speak softly and carry a big stick, he says. He expands the U.S. Navy, negotiates the end of the Russo-Japanese War, winning a Nobel Peace Prize, and engineers Panama's independence from Colombia, so America can build the Panama Canal. By 1914. America is a rising power, but it's still not a superpower. That transformation requires a catastrophe. August 1914. Europe explodes into the Great War, later called World War I. Austria-Hungary, Germany, and the Ottoman Empire face Britain. France and Russia. Millions mobilize. Everyone expects a short war. They're tragically wrong. The war bogs down into trench warfare. Two opposing lines of trenches stretching 400 miles from the English Channel to Switzerland. Soldiers live in mud, filth, and constant danger. Attacks send men over the top into machine gun fire and artillery. Millions die for gains measured in yards. New horrors appear: poison gas, flamethrowers, tanks, aerial bombing. At Verdun, 700,000 casualties in 10 months. At the Somme, 20,000 British soldiers die on the first day alone. President Woodrow Wilson declares American neutrality. Most Americans support this. Europe's wars aren't America's problem. He kept us out of war, is Wilson's 1916 re-election slogan. But neutrality becomes impossible. Britain blockades Germany, stopping American trade. Germany responds with submarines, U-boats sinking merchant ships without warning. In 1915, a U-boat sinks the Lusitania, killing 1,198 people, including 128 Americans. Wilson protests, but doesn't declare war. Germany temporarily stops unrestricted submarine warfare. But in January 1917, desperate to win before being starved out, they resume it, knowing it will bring America into the war, but gambling they can win first. Then British intelligence intercepts the Zimmermann telegram. Germany secretly proposes an alliance with Mexico, offering to help Mexico reclaim Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona if America enters the war. It's the final straw. On April 2nd, 1917, Wilson asks Congress for a declaration of war. The world must be made safe for democracy, he declares. 4 days later, America enters the Great War. American mobilization is staggering. 4 million men serve. 2 million reach Europe. American industry shifts to war production. The government sells Liberty bonds and takes unprecedented control of the economy. American forces, the American Expeditionary Force under General John J. Pershing, arrive as Allied forces are exhausted. Fresh American troops tip the balance. In 1918, combined Allied American offensives push Germany back. By November, Germany is collapsing. On November 11, 1918, at 11 a.m., the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, the armistice takes effect. The guns fall silent after 4 years of carnage. Over 16 million are dead worldwide. Another 21 million wounded. Empires have collapsed: Russian, Ottoman, Austro-Hungarian, German. The world is transformed. And America, which lost 116,000 soldiers, tragic. But far fewer than European nations, emerges as a major power. Perhaps the major power. Wilson travels to Paris for the peace conference with grand visions. His 14 points propose a fair peace, self-determination for nations, and a League of Nations to prevent future wars. But Britain and France want revenge. The Treaty of Versailles imposes harsh terms on Germany: territorial losses, military restrictions, and crushing reparations. Germany's economy is crippled, its people humiliated. Wilson wins establishment of the League of Nations, but returns home to a hostile Senate. Republicans oppose joining the League, fearing it compromises. American sovereignty. Wilson campaigns across the country, suffers a stroke, and becomes an invalid. The Senate rejects the Treaty of Versailles and League membership. America, having helped win the war and shape the peace, withdraws into isolation. It's a decision, with terrible consequences. The 1920s roar. America booms. New technologies, automobiles, radios, movies, electric appliances transform daily life. Henry Ford's assembly line produces affordable cars. The stock market soars. Jazz defines the era. Women get the vote with the 19th Amendment in 1920. Young people rebel against Victorian morality. The business of America is business, President Calvin Coolidge declares. Government stays out of the economy. Prosperity seems endless, but underneath, problems fester. Farmers struggle with debt. Income inequality grows, the wealthy get richer, while workers' wages stagnate. Easy credit fuels speculation. Stock prices rise far beyond companies' actual value. On October 29, 1929, Black Tuesday, the stock market crashes. Panic selling erases billions in wealth. It's the beginning of the Great Depression, the worst economic catastrophe in American history. Banks fail by the thousands, people lose their savings. Businesses close. Unemployment reaches 25%. Shanty towns, Hoovervilles, spring up in cities. Families lose their homes. People stand in breadlines. The Dust Bowl devastates agriculture, drought, and poor farming practices turn the Great Plains into a desert, forcing thousands to migrate west. President Herbert Hoover believes the government shouldn't intervene. The economy will correct itself, he insists. But it doesn't. Misery deepens. In 1932, Americans elected Franklin Delano Roosevelt in a landslide. FDR promises a new deal for the American people. He attacks the Depression with unprecedented government action. The New Deal creates programs still with us today: Social Security, unemployment insurance, bank deposit insurance, minimum wage, the right to unionize. Government builds dams, bridges, roads, and schools. It employs millions directly. It regulates Wall Street. It fundamentally redefines the government's relationship with citizens. The New Deal doesn't end the Depression. World War II does that, but it provides relief, rebuilds hope, and transforms American governance. The question shifts from whether the government should help citizens to how much it should help. But while America struggles with the Depression, ominous developments occur. Abroad, in Italy, Benito Mussolini established a fascist dictatorship. In Germany, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party rise to power, exploiting economic hardship and Versailles Treaty resentments. In Japan, militarists take control, seeking an empire. 3. Aggressive, expansionist dictatorships emerge, contemptuous of democracy, willing to use force. America watches warily, but stays isolated. No foreign wars is the overwhelming sentiment. After the Great War's carnage, Americans want nothing to do with Europe's problems. That position becomes harder to maintain. September 1st, 1939. German forces invade Poland. Britain and France declare war. World War II begins. Over the next 2 years, Germany conquers most of Europe. France falls in just 6 weeks. Britain fights alone, enduring devastating bombing. The Soviet Union, initially allied with Germany, is invaded in June 1941, the largest military invasion in history. In Asia, Japan invades China, committing horrific atrocities. Japan seeks to create an empire, the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, controlling Asia's resources. America watches, slowly abandoning neutrality. FDR provides aid to Britain. We must be the great arsenal of democracy, he says. But isolationist sentiment remains strong. Most Americans want to stay out. Then, on December 7th, 1941, everything changes. Sunday morning, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Japanese planes strike without warning, devastating the U.S. Pacific Fleet. 8 battleships are sunk or damaged. Over 2,400 Americans die. The next day, Roosevelt calls it a date which will live in infamy and asks Congress for a declaration of war. The vote is 388 to 1 in the House, unanimous in the Senate. 3 days later, Germany and Italy declare war. On America is in another world war, this time fighting on 2 fronts, against 3 powerful enemies. The mobilization is unprecedented. 16 million Americans serve about 11% of the population. Women work in factories. Rosie the Riveter becomes an icon. The economy shifts entirely to war production. Rationing is widespread. The government spends more in 4 years than it had in the previous 150. The early news is grim. Japan conquers the Philippines, capturing 75,000 American and Filipino troops who endure the brutal Bataan Death March. Japanese forces sweep through Southeast Asia and Pacific Islands. In Europe, German U-boats devastate Atlantic shipping. The Nazis occupy most of Europe and begin the Holocaust, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews and millions of others. But America's industrial capacity proves decisive. American factories produce staggering quantities: 300,000 aircraft, 88,000 tanks, 3 million machine guns. America becomes the arsenal of democracy for real, supplying not just its own forces, but Britain and the Soviet Union as well. Slowly, the tide turns. In the Pacific, American naval victories at the Coral Sea and Midway in 1942 halt Japanese expansion. Marines begin island hopping, capturing strategic islands, slowly moving toward Japan. Each battle is brutal: Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. The Japanese fight fanatically, rarely surrendering. Kamikaze pilots crash planes into American ships. In North Africa, American and British forces defeat Germany's Afrika Korps. In July 1943, Allies invade Sicily, then Italy. Italy surrenders, though fighting continues. The crucial front is France. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, 156,000 Allied troops assault Normandy's beaches in history's largest amphibious invasion. Casualties are heavy, but the beachhead holds. By August, Paris is liberated. American, British, and Canadian forces push into Germany from the west. Soviet forces advance from the east, having defeated Germany at Stalingrad and Kursk in massive battles. Germany is crushed between 2 advancing armies. In April 1945, American and Soviet troops meet at the Elbe River. On April 30th, Hitler commits suicide in his Berlin bunker. On May 8th, VE Day, Germany surrenders unconditionally. Europe's war is over. But the Pacific War continues and becomes even more terrible. In secret, American scientists have been developing the atomic bomb, the Manhattan Project, led by physicist Robert Oppenheimer. It's a race against fears that Germany might develop it first. The cost, $2 billion, equivalent to about $30 billion today. On July 16, 1945, the first test, codenamed Trinity, produces a blinding flash and mushroom cloud in the New Mexico desert. Oppenheimer recalls a line from Hindu scripture: "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." President Harry Truman, who became president when FDR died in April, faces a terrible decision. Invading Japan could cost 1 million Allied casualties and untold millions of Japanese. The atomic bomb might end the war immediately, but at what moral cost? On August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber named Enola Gay drops an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The city is obliterated, 70,000 die instantly, tens of thousands more from radiation. On August 9th, a second bomb destroys Nagasaki. On August 15th, Japan surrenders. World War II is over. The cost is almost incomprehensible. Somewhere between 70 and 85 million people are dead, about 3% of the world's population. The Holocaust murdered 6 million Jews. The Soviet Union lost 27 million people. China lost 15 to 20 million. Entire cities are destroyed. Europe and Asia lie in ruins. America lost 405,000, tragic, but far fewer than any other major power. And American territory, except Pearl Harbor, was untouched. American factories are intact. The American economy is booming. In 1945, America stands astride the world, militarily dominant, economically supreme, the only nation with atomic weapons. America is now a superpower, but it's not alone for long. Even as the war ends, a new conflict begins, not with bullets and bombs, but with ideology, espionage, and the threat of nuclear annihilation. The alliance between America and the Soviet Union was always uncomfortable, a marriage of convenience against a common enemy. Now, with Germany defeated, tensions surface. The Soviets occupy Eastern Europe, installing communist governments. Winston Churchill warns in 1946, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. Stalin seeks security through a buffer of satellite states. America sees Soviet expansion threatening freedom. George Kennan, an American diplomat in Moscow, sends his long telegram analyzing Soviet behavior and recommending containment, preventing further communist expansion. This becomes American strategy for the next 45 years. In 1947, Truman announces the Truman Doctrine. America will support free peoples resisting subjugation. It's prompted by communist threats to Greece and Turkey, but applies globally. America is committing to worldwide opposition to communism. The Marshall Plan follows $13 billion in aid to rebuild Western Europe, creating prosperous democracies that won't turn communist. It's enlightened self-interest and spectacularly successful. In 1948, Soviets blockade West Berlin, trying to force Allied withdrawal. Truman responds with the Berlin airlift. For 11 months, planes supply West Berlin. The Soviets finally give up. It's an early Cold War victory, but two shocks follow. In 1949, the Soviet Union tests its first atomic bomb far sooner than expected. Nuclear monopoly is over. Then China falls to communist forces under Mao Zedong. The world's most populous nation is now communist. Americans are rattled. Senator Joseph McCarthy exploits fears, claiming communists have infiltrated the government. His witch hunts ruin careers based on flimsy evidence. The Red Scare creates an atmosphere of paranoia. In June 1950, North Korea invades South Korea. Truman commits American forces under UN authorization. It's the first hot war of the Cold War. General Douglas MacArthur leads a brilliant counterattack, pushing North Koreans back to China's border. Then China intervenes with hundreds of thousands of troops. American forces retreat in brutal winter conditions. The war bogs down near the original border. MacArthur wants to escalate, even use nuclear weapons. Truman fires him. Civilian control of the military is paramount. The war ends in stalemate. In 1953, with an armistice that technically remains in effect today, Korea remains divided. 36,000 Americans died. Millions of Koreans and Chinese died. It's a frustrating war. The first America doesn't win. It sets a pattern for the Cold War. Limited wars fought to contain communism without triggering World War. 3. The 1950s and 60s see the Cold War dominate everything. Both sides build massive nuclear arsenals. America develops hydrogen bombs far more powerful than atomic bombs. So does the Soviet Union. Intercontinental ballistic missiles can deliver nuclear warheads anywhere on Earth in minutes. The doctrine becomes mutual assured destruction mad. Neither side can attack without being destroyed in retaliation. It's peace through the threat of annihilation. The world lives in the shadow of possible nuclear war. In 1962, that shadow nearly becomes reality. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev secretly installs nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida. American spy planes discover them. President John F. Kennedy demands their removal. For 13 days in October, the world teeters on the brink of nuclear war. Kennedy orders a naval blockade of Cuba called a quarantine to avoid the word blockade, which implies war. Soviet ships carrying missiles sail toward Cuba. Will they stop or force a confrontation? At the last moment, Khrushchev blinks. He agrees to remove the missiles if America promises not to invade Cuba, and secretly agrees to remove missiles from Turkey. The crisis ends. Humanity survives, but it's terrifyingly close. We now know some Soviet submarine commanders had authorization to use nuclear torpedoes. One officer, Vasily Arkhipov, refused, preventing nuclear war. One man's decision saved the world. The Cold War is also fought through proxies, covert operations, and the space race. In 1957, Soviets launched Sputnik, the first artificial satellite, shocking Americans. Kennedy responds by committing to land a man on the moon. On July 20, 1969, Neil Armstrong steps onto the lunar surface. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. But the era's greatest catastrophe is Vietnam. America supports South Vietnam against communist North Vietnam, fearing a domino effect. If one country falls to communism, neighbors will follow. Small commitments escalate. By 1968, over 500,000 American troops are in Vietnam, fighting a guerrilla war in jungles against an elusive enemy. The Tet Offensive in 1968 coordinated attacks by North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces is militarily defeated but psychologically devastating. Americans watching on television realize the war isn't being won. Anti-war protests grow. Young people burn draft cards. Hey, LBJ, how many kids did you kill today? They chant at President Lyndon Johnson. The country is bitterly divided. In 1973, America withdraws. In 1975, Saigon falls to communist forces. Desperate Vietnamese cling to helicopters, evacuating the American embassy. It's a humiliating defeat, America's first lost war. 58,000 Americans died. Millions of Vietnamese died. Vietnam haunts America. For decades, a reminder that military power has limits, that not every problem has a military solution. The 1970s and 80s see continued Cold War tensions, but also détente relaxation of hostilities. Arms control treaties limit nuclear weapons. Trade increases. But when the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan in 1979, tensions spike again. President Ronald Reagan, elected in 1980, calls the Soviet Union an evil empire and launches a massive military buildup, including the Strategic Defense Initiative, dubbed Star Wars, to shoot down nuclear missiles. But the Soviet Union is collapsing from within. Its economy is stagnant, unable to keep up with American military spending. The war in Afghanistan drains resources. It's the Soviets' Vietnam. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev becomes Soviet leader and attempts reforms, glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring. He reduces Cold War tensions, meeting Reagan for summits, agreeing to arms reductions. But reform unleashes forces he can't control. Eastern European nations begin breaking free. Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia throw off communist rule. The Berlin Wall falls in November 1989. In 1991, after a failed coup attempt, the Soviet Union itself dissolves. 15 independent nations emerge. Russia, largest of them, is weak and chaotic. The Cold War is over. The Soviet Union is gone. America stands alone as the world's sole superpower. 114 years. From regional power to global superpower. From staying out of foreign affairs to reshaping the world. The journey transformed America and the world. 2 world wars killed over 100 million people, but ended fascism and imperialism. The Cold War held the world hostage to nuclear threat, but avoided World War III. American power contained communism, rebuilt shattered nations, and defended democracy. At least that's how Americans saw it. Others saw American imperialism, interventions. That overthrew democracies, support for dictators when convenient. Vietnam, covert operations in Latin America. Support for apartheid South Africa. American power wasn't always used wisely or morally. But in 1991, America stood supreme economically, dominant, militarily unmatched, culturally influential. The American Century publisher Henry Luce called it in 1941. He was right. Yet power brings responsibility and temptation. The Cold War's end didn't mean peace. New challenges emerged: terrorism, regional conflicts, economic competition. The question became, what would America do with its unprecedented power? But that's another story. In 1991, as the Soviet flag came down over the Kremlin for the last time, one era ended and another began. America had become what its founders never imagined. Not a city on a hill, isolated and exemplary, but a global superpower, engaged everywhere. Its decisions affecting billions. From 1877 to 1991, America's journey from power to superpower reshaped the modern world. The consequences, for better and worse, are still unfolding today.